Hi, my name is Ruby Hart, and 2 years ago, my parents gave my sister $180,000 to start her dream business while telling everyone that I was the disappointment. I still remember sitting at that dinner table, hearing those words, realizing that no matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. So I disappeared. I left Portland with nothing but a quiet promise to myself that one day I would prove them wrong. Not through revenge, but through success. Have you ever been labeled the failure in your own family, only to rise higher than they ever imagined? And where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Thank you so much for being here. I still remember that night vividly. The late autumn cold in Portland was so thick it formed a thin layer of frost on the dining room window. My parents' old house sat on a small hill overlooking the suburbs, where maple leaves had fallen into streaks of gold and orange under the streetlights. It had been almost 8 months since the last time I was home, and as usual, nothing had changed. The long polished wooden table, the faint smell of roasted meat, the soft yellow light from the hanging lamp, and the endless stories about my perfect younger sister. I, Ruby Hart, 30 years old, a marketing specialist living in Seattle, had been invited home for a family dinner after a long time away. I thought it would be a peaceful evening, but I had no idea it would become the moment that changed how I saw my family forever. My mother, as always, led the conversation. She spoke with excitement about Emily, my younger sister 2 years younger, but the pride and joy of the entire family since childhood. "She's so talented," my mother said, setting her soup spoon down proudly. "We just transferred her $180,000 to start her own beauty brand. Emily says her idea is going to explode." I froze mid-cut, my knife hovering over the steak, thinking I'd misheard. $180,000. I looked toward my father. He was calmly spooning mashed potatoes, as if that amount of money was nothing. I asked softly, keeping my voice steady, "What about me?" The air at the table suddenly grew heavy. My father looked up, his eyes cold and hard as steel. He let out a faint, dismissive laugh, the kind that carried both pity and certainty. "You?" he said, pausing just long enough to let the silence sting. "You abandoned your last startup project, wasting both time and money. We don't take risks on failures, Ruby." The word failure dropped from his mouth sharp and final, like a verdict. My mother stepped in, her tone softer but no less cutting. "Emily has a clear plan. She knows what she wants. But you're always dreaming, jumping from one idea to the next. We just want you to be stable, to stop chasing things that don't make sense." I pressed my lips together, staring down, turning my fork around the plate to fight back the lump in my throat. It wasn't that I hadn't heard words like these before, it was that I'd heard them too many times, enough to memorize the rhythm of their contempt. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, leaves brushing the window like weary sighs. I looked at the glass of wine in front of me. The deep red reflected the warm light, showing me my own face calm, almost unnervingly so. Emily, as always, stayed quiet. She gave me a fleeting, guilty glance, then turned to Dad and continued talking about her brand's marketing strategy. They discussed plans enthusiastically: distribution, contracts, promotional budgets, branding angles, all things I, a marketing professional, understood better than anyone else in that room. But no one asked for my opinion. No one cared. Dinner dragged on painfully. Every word, every laugh from them cut another small wound inside me. I felt like a discarded draft, while the perfectly revised version named Emily was being praised and funded like a promising investment. I remembered when I was a kid, after winning the State Science Creativity Award, my father simply said, "Good. But remember, real success means making money." And now, at 30, I was still hearing that same voice, seeing that same look, only this time, I was old enough to know I would never wait for them to change again. After dinner, my father poured himself another glass of wine and spoke in that moralizing tone he always used when he wanted to sound wise. "Ruby, sometimes you have to understand that not everyone is born to succeed. Some people are meant to lead, and others are meant to follow. Emily was born with gifts. You, on the other hand, should know your limits. I looked at him, my hands cold and tight around the glass. In that moment, I saw clearly the distance between us, a distance that could never be bridged, not by achievement, not by explanation. They didn't hate me. They simply never believed I could be more than what they imagined. When dinner ended, I stood to help my mother clear the table. She placed a hand on my shoulder, smiling awkwardly. "Don't be upset, dear. We only want what's best for you. Who knows, if Emily succeeds, maybe she can pull you up with her." That sentence was the final cut. I smiled in return, saying nothing. Inside me, something broke, but also, something awakened. It was as if years of silence had finally burst open into sharp, undeniable clarity. That night, as I left the house, a single thought echoed in my mind, one I would never forget. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough, it was that they never truly wanted to see me succeed. Driving home, the streetlights flickered across my windshield like a heartbeat. I didn't cry. The anger was too old to turn into tears. I only felt hollow, as if someone had erased my entire history from the memories of those who should have remembered me most. When I stopped at a red light, I turned on the radio. An old Fleetwood Mac song filled the car, Stevie Nicks' voice stretching through the night, so achingly beautiful it made my chest tighten. I thought about the past. As a child, I used to believe that sentence was true, that love within a family didn't need to be proven. But I had learned early that in that house, everything came with conditions, even affection. I was the firstborn, and Emily came 2 years after me. When she was born, my mother said the doctors had called her the miracle baby, the child she thought she would never have. Maybe that's why, from the moment Emily opened her eyes, she carried a kind of light I was never allowed to possess. Emily was the kind of child everyone adored, sweet, cheerful, always knowing how to make adults smile. I was different. I liked assembling toys, taking apart the TV remote to see how the batteries worked, sitting by the window for hours sketching mechanical designs that only existed in my head. When guests came over, Mom always called Emily out to greet them, while I was usually reminded, "Don't just sit there like that, at least try to smile, look normal." I tried. But every time I forced a smile that hadn't yet become real, she would already look away and sigh. My father was a man of harsh practicality. He worked as the chief accountant for a construction company and only believed in things that could be measured. Money, achievements, reputation. He never understood the joy I felt when creating something purely out of curiosity. I remember when I was 14, I built a small desk lamp powered by solar energy using old components I found at an electronics market. I brought it to him, excited and proud, hoping he'd be impressed. Instead, he frowned and asked, "What's this even for?" I said, "I just wanted to see if the idea would work." He stared for a moment, then threw the lamp into the trash, and said flatly, "Stop dreaming and learn how to be normal." The sound of that lamp hitting the bottom of the bin was so dry, so final. I thought I'd forget it one day, but even now, whenever I hear something drop to the floor, my chest tightens the same way. Meanwhile, Emily didn't have to try at all to be loved. All she had to do was show up, smile, and the whole house would light up. When I won first place in the high school science innovation contest, Dad only said, "Good, but no one makes a living drawing machine diagrams." But when Emily joined a school fashion show, Mom took her shopping for a $100 dress, took pictures and posted them on Facebook with the caption, "Our little star." I remember standing by the doorway, peeking through the crack as Mom fixed Emily's hair, her smile so gentle it almost felt like it belonged to a stranger. Those years, I was always the smart but difficult child. Whenever relatives came over, Mom would introduce Emily first. "She's such a sweetheart, everyone loves her," and then turned to me with a half-hearted addition, "Ruby's the smart one." The way she said it made smart sound like a side note, not something to be proud of. Dad often lectured me about femininity. "You should learn to wear makeup like your sister, or at least stop talking like someone who's always trying to win an argument." I never replied. I just quietly withdrew. I still remember one rainy afternoon when I was working on a group project designing a model bridge made of wooden sticks. I spent hours calculating angles, gravity distribution, and the strength of each beam. When it was nearly finished, Emily ran in, curious, and touched the model, causing one side to collapse. Dad walked in, saw the mess, and yelled, "What is this nonsense again? Why can't you do something useful instead of wasting time on childish things?" He didn't listen to my explanation. He simply bent down, picked up the broken pieces, and threw everything into the trash. I watched it lying there among the wet garbage, glue running down like tears. Mom pulled Emily close, wiped her hands, and said softly, "It's okay, sweetie. Your sister's just a little strange." Emily stayed quiet, nodded, and followed her out of the room. I sat alone in my small bedroom, listening to the rain tapping against the roof, and for the first time, I felt a kind of loneliness I couldn't name. I didn't know what else I could do to be seen. I studied harder, behaved better, achieved more, yet every step forward seemed to make them more irritated. That was when I began to understand that in that house, love wasn't shared, it was given as a reward to those who knew how to please. Sometimes, I wondered if things would have been different, if my parents might have loved me more had I been someone else. If I knew how to say the right things, how to pretend to be fragile, how to smile even when it hurt, would they have seen me then? But every time that thought crossed my mind, something in my throat tightened. I didn't want to be another version of Emily, not even a little. I wanted to be loved as myself, but that seemed too extravagant a wish in a house where everything was measured by someone else's standards. As I got older, I started spending more time at school, joining science clubs, staying in the lab until late at night. I didn't want to go home. I only felt like I truly existed when I wasn't around them. Once, my teacher told me, "You have a remarkable mind, Ruby. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." I smiled but never told anyone about it, because I knew that if my parents heard, they'd only respond, "Being special doesn't pay the bills." I left Portland the summer after I graduated from college. When the bus rolled toward Seattle, I sat by the window, holding tightly to my one-way ticket, watching the mountains fade into the misty morning. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. It felt like walking out of a suffocating room where I'd learned to hold my breath for 22 years. Seattle greeted me with the scent of rain, city lights glimmering over the surface of Puget Sound, and an air that felt both unfamiliar and full of promise. I rented a small apartment near downtown and started my first job at a major marketing firm specializing in tech branding. On my first day, as I stepped into the office, my heart raced. It felt like crossing into another world, one where no one knew my past, no one compared me to Emily, and no one used the word strange to describe me anymore. I worked without stopping. I was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, paying attention to every small detail in each campaign. I didn't just want to do well, I wanted to make sure I would never be called a failure again. But that fear followed me like a shadow. Every time my manager said "excellent job," I still heard my father's voice in my head. Dreams don't pay the bills. I earned a good salary, bought my first car, and paid my rent comfortably, but it never felt like enough. I lived in a state of half confidence, half insecurity, as if every success I achieved was temporary, and one day, someone would expose me as not being as capable as they thought. That winter, I got a call from my mother. "Come home for Christmas," she said. "Emily's planning a small dinner at the house." I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I thought maybe I was grown enough now, strong enough not to be hurt by the same old things. But when I walked into that house, everything was exactly the same except for me. The long dining table was still in its place, the chandelier still shimmered, and my parents' laughter still filled the room every time Emily talked about her latest achievements. Dinner began, as always, with praise for Emily. "She's so smart, so visionary, so bold," my mother said. I sat quietly, cutting my chicken into small pieces, trying to keep my face neutral. Mom asked me a few polite questions about work, but when I started talking about a recent ad campaign I had managed, she interrupted. "Oh, Emily's working with her own marketing team now too. You could learn a few things from her, might help your career." I smiled and nodded, hiding the sting that spread through my chest. I was used to being overlooked, but what exhausted me most was that they didn't even realize it, or worse, they thought it was normal. Halfway through dinner, my father suddenly asked, his voice calm and businesslike. "So, when will you have a real career like your sister?" I looked up at him. It wasn't the first time I'd heard that question, but this time I realized he wasn't asking to know, he was asking to remind me of my place. The one who was behind. The one who wasn't enough. I smiled faintly and said quietly, "I'm building it, in my own way." He laughed, a dry, hollow sound echoing through the warm, candlelit room. "Don't fool yourself, Ruby. Dreams don't pay the bills." The words hit me like a cold stone. I didn't react, didn't argue. I just looked at him, the man who once meant the world to me, the man I used to believe would be proud if only I were good enough. But his eyes were the same as always, untouched by belief. Emily placed a gentle hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Come on, Dad. She'll be fine someday." The word fine, coming from her lips, sounded like pity for someone hopeless. I just wanted to leave. That night, as snow began to fall thinly across the yard, I stood alone on the porch. From inside came the sound of Christmas music, laughter, and the smell of freshly baked waffles. Everything looked beautiful, warm, and perfect except for me, the one person who didn't belong in the picture. I looked up at the gray Portland sky, wondering why I kept coming back to a place that hurt me so deeply. Maybe it was because some part of me still hoped that one day they would finally see me as an adult, not as Emily's unfinished draft. But that night, I knew I was wrong. Driving back to Seattle, I crossed the Fremont Bridge, the city glowing faintly through the mist ahead. I turned on the radio, but I didn't really hear anything. All that echoed in my mind was my father's voice. "We don't take risks on failures." And that sentence became the fire I carried with me for the years that followed, not to prove him wrong, but to prove that I existed, even when they refused to see me. That was the last time I ever sat at their dinner table. A month after that dinner, Seattle sank into its coldest winter in years. The sky was a dull gray, like a heavy blanket pressing down on everything, and the wind that swept through the skyscrapers sounded like the city itself was sighing from exhaustion. I still went to work as usual, carrying my cup of hot coffee and a fragile hope that things would somehow be okay. But that morning, the air in the conference room felt different, tense in a way that made my stomach tighten. On the table were white envelopes, and my boss, usually calm and composed, looked weary for the first time. "We have to make some cuts," he said, his voice low. "The economy's been rough, Ruby. No one wanted this. You're one of the employees being affected." I heard those words like snow falling onto the ground, soft, but cold enough to freeze me completely. I sat still, not crying, not speaking, just staring at the bold letters on the paper before me. Termination of employment. 2 years of dedication, hundreds of overtime hours, countless sleepless nights, all reduced to a single envelope. As I stepped out of the building, the wind stung my face like needles, and I realized I was holding a small cardboard box with a few personal items inside. A tiny potted plant, a few notebooks, and a photo of Seattle taken from the 20th floor, a picture I'd captured on my very first day. That image had once made me proud. Now, it was nothing more than a quiet memory. That night, I called my mother. I didn't want to complain, I just wanted to hear her voice, to feel like I still belonged somewhere. The phone rang for a long time before she finally answered. I spoke softly, "Mom, I just got laid off." There was a long silence on the other end before she replied, her tone calm but cold as ice. "Maybe you should learn from Emily. She always has a plan and never lets herself end up in situations like that." I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. "I'm not asking for help," was all I said before hanging up. No words of comfort, no simple, "Are you okay?" Just another comparison, the same as always. Only this time, it didn't break me. It just confirmed what I already knew. There was nothing left to expect from them. While I was struggling, Emily's face was everywhere on my family's social media pages. My mother posted photos of her cutting the ribbon at the grand opening of her luxury beauty brand, M. Rose Beauty. The caption beneath glowed with pride. Our youngest daughter is now a CEO. I wish we all lived closer so we could share this joy together. I remember scrolling past that post on my phone while eating lunch alone in a small cafe. In the picture, Emily stood in a white dress, smiling radiantly beside a golden sign, with our parents on either side of her, holding hands, their eyes shining with pride. And me, their eldest daughter, I was reduced to a passing mention whenever neighbors asked, "How's Ruby doing these days?" "Oh, she's working for some company in Seattle," my mother would say, her tone hovering somewhere between pride and indifference, as though she were talking about a distant acquaintance. The days that followed passed in silence. My old apartment was too expensive, so I moved into a small room near the Duwamish River, where the morning fog was so thick it hid the buildings across the water. The walls were slightly cracked, the wooden floor creaked with every step, and the heater worked only when it wanted to. I lived off my remaining savings, ate instant noodles, drank cheap coffee, and spent most of my time staring through the fogged-up window. Every night, I woke up in the dark to the distant rumble of freight trains, their yellow lights sweeping briefly across my curtain like wandering ghosts of another life. That was when I began to rewrite everything, not just my career plans, but my entire life. I opened my laptop, created a new file named Reset 2020, and started listing 3 columns. What I want, what I need, what I will never accept again. The first thing I wrote under never accept again was disrespect from those who were supposed to believe in me. Writing that sentence made it easier to breathe. I remembered my father once saying, "The world doesn't wait for the weak." He was right, but what he never understood was that weakness isn't failure. Weakness is where self-understanding begins. Every morning, I woke up early and walked along the riverbank, watching my breath rise in the cold air. I told myself, if no one believes in me, then I will believe in myself. I started reading books about business, learning new digital marketing skills, and taking on small freelance projects just to keep my rhythm going. Some days I earned a few $100s, some days nothing at all. But strangely, I didn't feel hopeless. I felt as though I was peeling away the layers my parents had wrapped around me, the layers of expectation, fear, and the belief that I was never good enough. In the months that followed, my life unfolded quietly in that small room by the Duwamish River, where the glow of the streetlights reflected through the fogged window each night. I no longer had an office to go to, no colleagues, no boss, no meetings where your worth was measured by the number of slides in a presentation. It was just me, an old laptop, and the sound of the keyboard tapping steadily like a heartbeat. I started taking small online contracts in digital marketing, writing content, optimizing campaigns, designing ads for small businesses. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to live on, enough to remind me that I still mattered. On long nights, when the city slept, I sat in front of the glowing screen, my eyes burning, a cold cup of coffee by my side. I worked until 3 or 4 in the morning, learning how to reinvest every small amount I earned. There were times I thought I couldn't go on. The exhaustion, the loneliness, and the rain outside my window made everything feel heavy. But then I would remember my father's condescending stare, his words, "Dreams don't pay the bills," and that pain became fuel. I told myself, if dreams don't pay the bills, then I'll build a company that makes sure they do. One evening, while browsing freelance forums for new projects, I stumbled upon a post by someone named Liam Cooper, a tech specialist and former software engineer for a major startup in San Francisco. He was looking for a marketing collaborator for an experimental app development project. I sent in my portfolio, not expecting much, but a day later he replied, "I like how you present ideas. Do you have time to talk?" We met for the first time at a small cafe near Union Lake. Liam was nothing like the people I'd known in the industry, not polished, not overly talkative, his eyes deep and calm, like someone who had seen enough failure to no longer need to prove anything. When I told him I'd been laid off, he just nodded and said, "Most real beginnings start with what we think are endings." That sentence hit me harder than any comforting words ever could. After a few weeks of working together, we realized we were on the same wavelength, both passionate about creativity, both allergic to pretense, and both believing that a person's true value didn't need a last name attached to it. One night, as we worked late at the cafe, Liam looked at me, half joking, half serious, and said, "Ruby, why don't we build our own platform? A company that doesn't rely on identity, only on capability." I looked up and smiled. "An anonymous company?" He nodded. "Exactly. Let the world see the results, not the people behind them." That idea was like a spark flashing through the darkness I'd been living in for months. We began sketching out the plan. I handled the branding strategy, while Liam built the technical foundation. After countless late nights of debating, testing, and refining every small detail, we finally chose a name: Nova Dynamics. Nova meant a star that burns brightest after the dark. The logo was just a single small star against a black background, symbolizing light born from failure. I decided to hide my real identity. No longer Ruby Hart, the name that carried all the weight of my parents' judgment. I signed every contract and sent every email under the name R. Hart. No one knew who I was, not my gender, not my age, not my past. They only knew that someone by that name worked precisely, efficiently, and always delivered on time. For the first time, I was being valued purely for what I could do, not for the family name I carried. Nova Dynamics started small, just 2 people and a makeshift desk. But in that cramped rented room, filled with the smell of coffee and the steady rhythm of typing keys, we built something I'd never had before: trust. We began by designing marketing campaigns for local craft brands, then expanded into e-commerce projects. One successful campaign led to another, and soon, clients began whispering about the mysterious team from Seattle. I remember one night, while we were reviewing our first profitable revenue report, Liam looked at me, a quiet smile lighting his face under the blue glow of the screen. "See," he said. "It's just a small light now, but it's growing." I nodded, unable to speak. My throat tightened as I realized I was finally living days that meant something: no more fear of comparison, no more dread of being dismissed. I didn't need anyone's validation anymore. The results spoke for themselves. In the 6th month, Nova landed its first major contract, a deal worth over $120,000 with an online retail chain in California. It was 10 times larger than any project I'd ever worked on before. I still remember the moment I received the confirmation email. My hands trembled slightly, my heart raced, not because of the money, but because, for the first time in my life, I felt free from their shadow. I was no longer the failure my father once labeled me. I was the founder of a growing company, a small star that shone on its own, in its own universe. That night, I stepped out onto the balcony. A light rain fell over Seattle, and I looked up at the drops glimmering in the streetlight like 1,000 tiny stars. I whispered to myself, "Nova Dynamics, light born from darkness." And in that moment, I realized that maybe every wound I had ever carried existed only to teach me how to stand in the dark and still know I was shining. One spring morning, as the first sunlight poured through the windows of our small Nova Dynamics office, I received a text from Liam. "Have you seen Tech World this morning?" I grabbed my phone, my heart pounding as the headline appeared in bold across the screen. Nova Dynamics, the silent brand builder behind America's fastest growing startups. The article described how an anonymous marketing company from Seattle had quietly crafted breakthrough campaigns for a series of rising brands. They called us the silent architects of branding. I read every line, a mixture of awe and emotion swelling inside me. There were no photos of me, no mention of my real name, only R. Hart, the alias I had chosen. Yet, for the first time in my life, I felt proud to be unseen. This success didn't need a face, didn't need the Hart name. It only needed the work, and the results spoke louder than anything else ever could. The news spread faster than I expected. Collaboration emails started pouring in, clients reaching out from all over New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Liam walked into the office, tossed a magazine onto the table, and grinned. "We've officially stepped into the light in our own way." I looked at the cover, at the small Nova star shining against the black background, and whispered, "Light from darkness, finally seen." Work tripled. I was so busy I lost track of time. Days were for client meetings, nights for strategic planning. I didn't know what kept me going anymore, adrenaline, maybe, or just coffee. But deep down, I felt peaceful. The kind of peace that comes when you know, for once, you're exactly where you're meant to be. One late evening, while reviewing the revenue dashboard, a social media notification appeared on my screen. A new post from Emily Hart. I hadn't planned to open it, but my eyes moved on instinct. There she was, the same radiant smile, the same confident pose under the caption. Emrose Beauty is expanding to California. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for always believing in me. Couldn't have done it without you. The post had thousands of likes. Beneath it were comments like, such an inspiring young CEO. What an amazing family. I stared at the photo for a long time. Not out of jealousy, but because I realized nothing had changed. It was the same play, only on a bigger stage. I didn't blame Emily. She wasn't the writer of this script, my parents were the directors. They always needed someone to be proud of, and someone to diminish. Emily was their pride, I was their comparison. But for the first time, instead of feeling hurt, I felt calm. I finally knew who I was becoming, and that meant I no longer needed their validation. A few weeks later, I received a financial report from Nova's market research team. Among the list of beauty brands seeking restructuring partners, one name stood out: Emrose Beauty. I read every line carefully. Revenue down 37% over 2 quarters, nearly $400,000 owed to suppliers, and an urgent search for a strategic investor to maintain operations. I sat in silence. My first emotion wasn't satisfaction, it was something deeper, quieter, like hearing an echo from the past finally returning to you. Liam walked in, set a cup of coffee on my desk, and said slowly, Emrose is looking for a strategic partner. If we want to expand into the beauty sector, this is a solid opportunity. And if we acquire it through a subsidiary, they'll never know it's you. I looked up at him. There was no curiosity or cheap thrill in his eyes, only the calm certainty of someone who believed that the right actions carried their own weight. I didn't speak for a long time. Memories flooded back: that dinner where my mother said they'd transferred $180,000 to Emily, my father's cold stare as he called me a failure, and the laughter that followed when they called Emily, the little CEO of the family. I took a deep breath. A part of me wanted to walk away, to keep moving forward without ever touching that world again. But another part, the one that had been dismissed, belittled, called a mistake, whispered, it's time to let the truth speak for itself. I looked at Liam, a faint smile forming on my lips. Let's do it, I said. But not for revenge. Let the truth speak for us. He nodded, and that was how it began. Liam established a subsidiary called Aria Ventures, a perfect cover for the acquisition. My name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. Everything went through intermediaries, lawyers, and brokers who had no idea who was truly behind it all. Throughout the entire process, I didn't feel triumphant, only an uncanny stillness, as if the scattered pieces of my life were quietly falling into place. One evening, I sat in my office, staring out the window as Seattle lit up for the night. The city lights shimmered across the water, sparkling like shards of glass. I thought about my parents, about Emily, about all those years I had spent trying to prove I was good enough. And I laughed softly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. They had taught me something priceless, that sometimes silence is the most powerful weapon. They said I was a dreamer. They were right. But my dream, now, had become something capable of changing their fate. That night, before leaving the office, I opened my laptop and saved the acquisition file under the name Operation Lightfall. Lightfall, not to burn, but to reveal. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and in the dim hallway whispered to myself. No retaliation. Just truth. Let them see I was never the failure. When the acquisition plan was finalized, I realized I had entered a stage where the past and present were beginning to merge, no longer a line between proving and revealing. Aria Ventures, the company Liam had registered, was established within 2 weeks. We hired a team of attorneys in Los Angeles to ensure every document was legitimate, clean, and free of any trace leading back to Nova Dynamics or to my real name. Every investment, every call, every email passed through intermediaries. I remained the quiet architect in the shadows, operating under one name only, R. Hart. In the documents, Aria Ventures was described as a strategic investment fund focused on revitalizing and expanding startup brands in the beauty and consumer sectors. That description quickly caught the attention of Emrose Beauty, a company now sinking deeper into crisis. I knew, because I had been following them for months. Their revenue charts had plummeted, inventory was piling up, and Emily's once glowing social media posts were now mixed with repetitive marketing slogans and waves of negative customer comments. But what struck me most wasn't their financial collapse. It was the uncanny resemblance between my sister now and the version of myself I used to be, desperately holding together a perfect image to hide the cracks beneath. When Liam told me that Aria Ventures had been invited to the negotiation meeting, I sat in silence for a long time. "They won't know," he said firmly. "All documents are signed under the company's legal representative. You'll just be a voice on Zoom, no face, no name." I nodded, feeling a chill run through me, not from fear of being discovered, but from disbelief that this moment had truly arrived. The day I would gain control of the very company they once used to define my failure. The meeting took place on a Monday morning. I sat in my office in Seattle, the window slightly open, a cool breeze drifting in. On the screen was the conference room in Portland, where Emily sat between my parents. My father wore a gray suit, arms folded across the table, his posture radiating confidence, almost arrogance. Emily smiled, but there was exhaustion in her eyes. "We're very excited about this potential partnership with Aria Ventures," she said politely, then added, "Our company has great potential, it just needs the right push at the right time." I stayed silent, letting the synthesized voice speak for me. "We believe in the vision of Emrose Beauty," the artificial voice said evenly, emotionless. "With the right investment and guidance, this brand can come back stronger than ever. Our proposal is to acquire 70% of the company's shares. In return, Emrose will retain its brand name, while the executive team will continue to operate under the advisory of Aria Ventures." I saw my father tilt his head slightly, his eyes lighting up. He turned to my mother and whispered, "Finally, someone recognizes Emily's potential." Then he looked directly into the camera, his tone brimming with pride. "Excellent. We only want what's best for our daughter's company. Emrose was built with love and dedication from our whole family." I suppressed a quiet sigh. Love and dedication, words they had never once used to describe anything about me. Emily nodded, relief flickering across her face. "If Aria Ventures truly believes in us, I'm ready to cooperate. We just need someone strong enough to help Emrose rise again." Her voice trembled slightly, as if she knew this was her last lifeline. I wanted to tell her that I understood that desperate, fragile hope of holding on to something before it slips away, but I couldn't. All I could do was stay silent, watching them through the screen like someone both observing and rewriting a film from the inside. When the final contract appeared on the screen, I signed R. Hart with my digital signature. The cursor hovered, then a single click echoed through the quiet room, simple, swift, and yet as heavy as the closing of a chapter that had defined my entire life. In that instant, I became the new owner of Emrose Beauty, the company they once hailed as the pride of the Hart family. None of them in that meeting room knew that behind the nameless, mechanical voice was the daughter they had once called a failure. After signing, Liam sent a message. "Done. We own 70%. Congratulations, boss." I stared at those words for a long time. There was no thrill, no satisfaction, no surge of victory, only an odd, deep quiet spreading through me. I stood up and walked out onto the balcony. The Seattle sky was heavy with clouds, the wind cutting cold against my skin. Below, the traffic moved steadily, and I suddenly understood with absolute clarity that all my efforts had never been about revenge, they had always been about freedom. A few days later, Emrose Beauty released a public statement. "We are proud to announce our strategic partnership with Aria Ventures. The accompanying photo was posted across social media, Emily standing between our parents, shaking hands with the supposed lead representative of Aria, a man they believed was the one in charge. 3 months after the acquisition was finalized, Emrose Beauty, once celebrated as the pride of the Hart family, entered what the press called its transition phase. On paper, it was just a normal restructuring after new investment. But inside, everything changed in ways Emily could never have imagined. Meetings were no longer held in her Portland headquarters but conducted remotely, coordinated entirely by Aria Ventures. Every major decision from marketing campaigns and distributor contracts to new product launches had to be approved by one person listed in the system as R. Hart. At first, Emily assumed the name belonged to a mid-level executive from the parent company, perhaps a professional consultant hired to oversee the transition. But over time, that name began to appear everywhere in every email, every memo, every document she received. And whenever she tried to make a decision on her own, a reply from R. Hart always came swiftly, polite yet firm, ending with the same short sentence. Let's focus on sustainable strategy, not emotional choices. Hi. That sentence drove Emily crazy. She had always been used to leading freely, to being praised and admired, so having every move monitored made her feel like a prisoner inside the very company she'd built. More than once, she complained to her father. They call themselves partners, she said bitterly, but it feels like they've stripped away all my authority. Her father, Richard Hart, simply replied, "You need to learn how to cooperate. They're the ones who saved your company. When people invest money, they earn the right to speak." Emily fell silent, but inside, frustration was boiling. One morning in August, as sunlight poured through the glass wall of her office, she received an urgent email from the finance department. The subject line read, "Budget approval required, R. Hart to confirm." For the second time that week, her proposed budget plan had been rejected. The reason was brief. Lack of focus in allocation, adjust R&D spending ratio. The signature at the bottom was, once again, R. Hart. Emily bit her lip, furious. It felt like a deliberate challenge, as if this mysterious person was slowly cutting away her authority piece by piece. That afternoon, she called Aria Ventures representative, a middleman named Marcus, and demanded, "I want to know who our final approver is. Is R. Hart a real person or just a code name for some team?" Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not authorized to disclose the executive identity of Nova Dynamics," he said cautiously. "All we know is that R. Hart is a senior executive within Nova and currently oversees Emrose during the transition phase." Emily's grip tightened around her phone. Nova Dynamics. The name sounded familiar. Too familiar. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She opened her laptop and started searching. In the LinkedIn search bar, she typed, "Nova Dynamics CEO." The first result appeared. A simple profile, white background, the name displayed clearly. Ruby Hart, founder and CEO, Nova Dynamics. She froze. Every sound in the room seemed to vanish. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, her palms damp with sweat even though the air conditioning was on full blast. She stared at the name, reading it over and over, unable to believe what she was seeing. Ruby Hart. Her sister. The one their parents had once declared not business-minded. The one they'd called a dreamy failure. The one they had cut off completely years ago. And now, that very name stood at the head of the company that had just taken over Emrose. Her mind reeled as memories flooded back, every email she'd received, every proposal that had been rejected, every calm reminder not to make emotional decisions. The writing style was unmistakable, concise, direct, but with an odd warmth underneath. How had she not seen it sooner? Hair, head, spoon. Images from the past came rushing in, her parents constantly comparing the two of them, the teasing remarks she used to laugh along with. The nights when Ruby sat silently in her room while the rest of the family celebrated Emily's success because the youngest daughter made the papers. She felt herself drowning in a wave of guilt. Ruby had done all of this? Not to destroy them, but to prove that she had never needed anyone's approval to begin with. She stumbled out of her chair, trembling, pacing the length of her office. Her hand gripped the phone tightly as she dialed her father's number. The line rang a few times before his calm, composed voice came through. "Sweetheart, what's going on?" He still sounded so sure of himself, so certain that everything was under control. Emily had to take a deep breath to stop herself from breaking down. Dad, you need to see this. Now, she shouted, her voice shaking, her heart racing. The company, the one that bought Rose, it's Ruby, Nova Dynamics belongs to her. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end. Then came the sound of a chair scraping, her father rising abruptly. "What did you just say?" "It's her, Dad, our Hart, is Ruby Hart, she's the one behind everything." In that instant, Emily understood she was no longer the golden child her parents once adored. She was simply a character in a story someone else had rewritten with the same quiet strength they had once mocked. And somewhere, in an office in Seattle, Ruby Hart watched the screen light up with the notification. "Incoming call from Emily Hart." I didn't answer. I just watched it ring until it stopped, then whispered to myself. Finally, the truth has spoken. That morning, the sky over Seattle was a dull gray, the air thick with the chill of early winter. I sat in the conference room on the 22nd floor of Nova Dynamics, the glass walls reflecting the pale light of the city below. On the table sat a cold cup of coffee, a few unopened folders, and behind me, the logo on the wall Nova Dynamics, light from the dark. I had been sitting there for nearly half an hour, waiting for them. Part of me still couldn't believe that this moment, the one I had feared and longed for in equal measure, was finally about to happen. The door opened. I looked up. Emily entered first, followed by my parents. My mother wore a cream-colored wool coat, her face pale, her eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept all night. My father walked just behind her, his suit perfectly pressed, though the confidence that once filled his eyes was gone. When he saw me, he stopped. The three of them stood there for several seconds, frozen, as if this moment existed beyond anything they could have imagined. I stayed seated, my hand resting lightly on the table, my voice steady and calm. "Thank you for coming." My father was the first to break the silence. He stepped forward, his voice rough. You're the owner of this company?" I met his gaze directly, offering a faint smile. "Not just this company, Dad, Rose too. You and Mom once gave Emily $180,000 to start her dream. All I needed," I said softly, "was your contempt." "Oh." A cold current of air seemed to move through the room. My mother raised her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide as tears began to fall. No, that can't be." My father said nothing. He turned to Emily, then back to me, his face searching for some rational explanation for the impossible. His voice dropped to a slow, uncertain whisper. "So, you're our Hart? The one who bought your sister's company?" I nodded, my tone quiet as breath. "Yes, it's me. Emily stood behind them, her hand gripping her phone, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Ruby. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know it was you." I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw confusion and guilt swirling together. I didn't hate her. In truth, I don't think I ever did. "You don't need to know," I said gently. "What matters is now you see." My mother broke down, stepping closer, her voice trembling through her tears. "My daughter, I never thought it would come to this. I wanted both of you to succeed. We were wrong, but you didn't have to go this far." I stood up, walking slowly around the table. "This far, Mom? You mean building a company? Working day and night just to stand on my own without anyone's help? Or proving that I wasn't the failure you always said I was?" I stopped by the window, looking down at the city stretching out beneath us. "Mom, I didn't do this for revenge. I built something you never believed I could." "Hull." My father stayed silent. He walked across the room, staring at the Nova Dynamics logo on the wall as if trying to understand it. He ran his fingers along the glass surface that reflected the faint light, then spoke softly, almost to himself. All of this, you did all of this, without us. I turned back toward him, my expression calm. Not without you, Dad, because there wasn't any with you to begin with. 60 what? He lifted his head, our eyes met, and for a fleeting moment I saw no pride, no judgment, only a man who had realized too late that he had lost something priceless. His daughter's trust. His voice cracked as he said, "We were wrong." The words were short, simple, but I heard each one land like stones dropped into water, sending out ripples of regret that filled the room. My mother stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Emily sank into a chair, her hands covering her head. I returned to my seat, placed my hand on the folder before me, and spoke quietly. Rose will continue operating. I've restructured it to have a real chance, not one built on reputation or money, but on genuine value. Emily will stay, but this time, she'll have to work not as the Hart family's golden daughter, but as an employee, someone who earns her place through skill. My father looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Fair, he said softly. Maybe for the first time, things in this family are actually fair. I didn't know why, but hearing that made something ache deep in my chest. Not pride, something closer to sorrow. Because for years, that was all I had wanted to hear from him. And now that I finally had, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The air in the room grew heavy. My mother tried to speak, but I raised a hand gently to stop her. I don't need an apology. What's done is done. The only thing I want now is distance. I'm no longer the child who needs approval. I'm the woman who built her own path. Emily stood, walking toward me. Ruby, I don't even know what to say. I believed everything they told me, that you weren't practical, that you could never succeed. But now I see, you never had to prove anything to them. I looked at her and smiled faintly. It's okay, Emily, at least now you see. My mother sobbed harder, and my father lowered his head, unable to look at anyone. I gathered the papers on the table, glanced at the three of them, and said, I think that's enough for today. Aria Ventures will continue managing Rose. As for me, I have my own life to live. I walked toward the door, my hand resting on the cold metal handle. I paused for a moment, then spoke without turning back. You once thought you invested in the right person. Maybe you did, but the truth is, I was the one who invested in myself. 1. I stood still in the hallway of Nova Dynamics, listening to the echo of my own footsteps blending with the slow, steady rhythm of my heartbeat. The conference room door had just closed behind me, leaving the three people I had spent my entire life trying to make proud now sitting in silence, surrounded by the fragments of memories that would never be whole again. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy or victory. Only a lightness, faint as a breath, the feeling you get when you finally set down a weight you've carried on your back for 10 long years. I hadn't sought revenge. I had only done the one thing I had always wished they understood. Fairness. When my father asked, what do you plan to do with Rose? I answered simply, my voice calm. The company will continue to operate. But from now on, it will be run with fairness, not privilege. I didn't need to destroy what they loved. I only needed to redefine its worth. If Rose had once been built on arrogance and money, then now it would survive on merit and integrity. I walked out, leaving them behind in silence. As the door closed, I could still hear faint traces, my mother's quiet sobs, my father's weary sigh, Emily's voice cracking as she tried to hold back tears. I didn't turn back. I didn't want to see their pity, nor their too-late remorse. I only wanted to keep this moment, the moment I walked away, as someone who had finally found herself. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with glass walls reflecting the pale afternoon light. As I passed the reception desk, the staff greeted me with warm professionalism. Good afternoon, Miss Hart. They had no idea what had just happened, and perhaps they didn't need to. In their eyes, I wasn't someone's disappointment anymore. I was their leader, the woman who had built this place. When I stepped out onto the 22nd floor balcony, the Seattle wind hit hard, sweeping through my hair, carrying with it the salty scent of rain and the sea. The sky was gray, but it no longer felt heavy. Below, the city shimmered, the streams of traffic glowing like bright arteries of life. I rested my hands on the railing, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. At last, I existed, not in their eyes, but in my own life. I thought of my father, of the look in his eyes when he saw the Nova Dynamics logo on the wall. It was a look mixed with pride and regret, as if, in that single moment, he finally understood that he hadn't just lost a daughter, he had missed witnessing her become who she was meant to be. I didn't know if he would ever forgive himself, but I knew that I had forgiven me for being small once, for hurting, for believing that my worth depended on someone else's approval. Now, I understood that every wound I'd carried had been part of the foundation that built the life I stand on today. When I returned to the office, Liam was waiting. He didn't ask anything, he just looked at me, his eyes warm, understanding everything without a word. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, smiling faintly. Better than ever. We sat together by the window, watching the city light up. In the distance, the Nova Dynamics sign glowed among the high-rises, bright and still, like the quiet kind of triumph that needs no applause. I realized then that freedom isn't always about walking away from someone. Sometimes, it's about walking away from the version of yourself that once begged to be accepted. I didn't need to be seen as a warrior who won, I just needed to see myself clearly. A woman who dared to rise, to choose her own path, and to keep living without hate, without bitterness, just peace. A few months later, spring returned to Seattle. The city looked greener, more alive, and Nova Dynamics continued to thrive under the leadership of the new team I had trained. I had sold most of my shares, keeping only a symbolic portion. These days, I spent my time mentoring young entrepreneurs, people who reminded me of who I once was, carrying big dreams while being told they weren't good enough. Whenever I shared my story, I never mentioned names, nor my past. I only said, don't let someone's silence convince you that you don't deserve to be heard. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from my father. The envelope was brown, the handwriting firm but slightly shaky, as if he had sat for a long time before daring to begin. I opened it and read line by line. Ruby. I don't know where to start. Maybe an apology now comes too late, but it still needs to be said. You've taught your mother and me a lesson about the true value of a person. Not everyone who's given an investment succeeds sometimes. The ones who weren't chosen are the ones with real strength. We're proud of you, Dad. Ugh. I read it through to the end, folded the letter, and set it on the table. I didn't cry, I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my journal and wrote on a new page. They once gave my sister $180,000 to start. Me? They gave me silence, and in that silence, I found my empire. That evening, I went up to the rooftop and watched the sunset spill across the city. The sky burned red, reflecting off the building where the Nova Dynamics logo glowed like gold. The wind carried the faint sound of waves from afar, brushing through my hair as I whispered a quiet farewell to the past. Sometimes, you don't need to make them regret it, you just need to make them realize you never needed them to win. I smiled. The sun sank behind the skyline, and in the fading light, I saw myself peaceful, free, and, finally, enough.